I constantly was running the same cycle over and over, and for me, I ended up in handcuffs.
It gave me an effect that finally felt okay.
I needed drugs to function. I needed drugs to survive.
I always cleaned up everything around me right before I used, thinking, okay, if they find me dead on the ground, I want everything to be nice and neat and put away.
Drugs and alcohol had taken me so far down, there was no way out but to take my own life.
It really took me losing absolutely everything to find myself again.
I grew up in Thousand Oaks, California, Newbury Park actually, but no one really knows that. So my childhood was marked by like isolation. I knew something was up. I think something intuitively I knew was up because I had the beginnings, I believe, of obsessive compulsive disorder that really and anxiety and all these things that just kind of racked my childhood. Everything was like the pink elephant in the room at my home, at where I was growing up. I have a brother who was 2 years older than me, and all this stuff was behind closed doors, but I never spoke with anyone about it. And my friends would pick on me about it, my weight and my size and my little behaviors, and I secretly, it hurt.
I always felt different, not a part of, which is interesting because I really had a lot of friends, I was popular, and I don't mean that to be egotistical, but I just felt disconnected everywhere I went.
I also was not happy as a child. I felt awkward, shy, never comfortable in my own skin. I needed relief from the discomfort I felt being me. I just didn't feel good about myself. I didn't like the way I looked. I didn't like the way I felt.
I always tried to portray like the cool girl attitude, I had a foul mouth and wore combat boots to school and had a, shaved pink mohawk going into high school. But I actually didn't get into drugs or alcohol until a little bit later in the game.
I did everything I could to not quote unquote be gay, whatever that means. So I tried to get involved in sports, I dated girls, which, gave me more ammunition to think, oh, this is some weird abnormality, the gay part. I need to keep sticking with what society says.
I always blame my mom. My mom always blamed me. My dad reacted to my mom for a period of time, and then he stopped reacting to her, and he just gave up. The evenings in my home were really turbulent. I love my mother. I think she had a little bit of a drinking issue. It made the home life in the evenings, it was markedly at like 4 p.m. to like 10 p.m. or 8 p.m. because she'd go to bed. There was a shift. There was a lot of emotional turbulence, and it was like, fucking hate you, you fucking suck, where's your girlfriend, and that's what my mom would yell, and I would yell back, and I was always the one that met her like venom with equal ferocity. I spat just back. Looking back on it now, it's like, no, she did the best she could with what she had, and I have responsibility. Now I do.
To compensate for the fact that I felt so alone and I felt so alienated, I honed and developed some great social skills, and it was a big effort. But I actually was very, very popular and always surrounded by friends. A lot of my friends, I would say, were a little bit were the outcasts, but a lot, you know, others weren't. But I really had to consciously work at it.
There was still a piece of me that was in my head, and that was my sexuality, especially playing sports was, you know, it was a huge passion for me. And, you know, I just couldn't turn off that voice that says they're gonna find out. And I was telling myself, I don't know where I came up with the concept, but I had to be one or the other, and I couldn't be both. I had a lot of suicide thoughts. A lot of it had to do with being gay, but it was more these emotions that I didn't understand what was going on internally with me.
I had a friend whose older brothers were like my idols. The police was always there. They were, you know, notorious for, you know, tripping on acid and doing drugs. That's what I wanted to be.
My escape was digital. I loved computer games. I was addicted. You know, I played them like 16 hours a day. I ate a lot of food. I felt like I was overweight. I had few friends, and that was okay. I didn't want to be myself. I think deep down inside I hated myself. I hated myself a lot, and I didn't know it.
The first time I drank, nothing happened. It was at my sister's birthday, and so one of my sister's friends offered me a Mike's Hard Lemonade, and I said no, because I said I don't like alcohol, and she said, oh, I'll just try it, and I took a sip, and you know, I realized, wow, this doesn't burn, this doesn't taste like alcohol, and I helped myself to 3 more, and that was my first experience drinking where I really felt what I had chased and enjoyed for the following probably 10 years.
At that point, I don't think I'd crossed over that invisible line of addiction, but I remember smoking weed, and that didn't really do it for me either. It was cool, but I was always hanging out with other people that I felt were like assholes. Like they got high and they turned into a prick, and I just wanted to like listen to Enya and like have an Oreo cookie shake and like just lay on my bed and listen to music, and I never really let myself do that.
My first experience was drinking, but I knew I was an alcoholic from the get-go. You know, that evening ended with me chasing Bud Light with really cheap vodka. I was just laid out on someone else's lawn, and that was it. That was my first drink. And I don't recall having that, you know, fuzzy warm feeling, and I had made it and all that, but you know, I do remember going from 0 to 100, and you know, that's how the rest of my using career went.
From early on, I knew I had a problem, and I knew that I didn't have control. If you put a drink in front of me, maybe once in a blue moon I could drink 1 or 2 drinks, but why would you just drink 1 or 2 drinks?
A friend came over to my house. I grew up in Miami, and she said, let's look in your mom's medicine chest for sleeping pills. I didn't know why she wanted to do that because it was early. I didn't know why she wanted to go to sleep. She convinced me to take one. And the minute I took it, I realized what she was talking about. Suddenly, I had an escape from the world and all that tormented me about the world. It was a great relief.
Long story short, snorted the meth, didn't really do anything, but the second time I did it, that's when I found God. That's that moment where I was like, this is it. This is fucking it. And I was up for like 3 days. I kind of was scared by it, and the drug kind of scared me. At that time, I wanted to be like the embodiment of that darkness in a sense, or that when I got to that point, I realized this isn't all great, you know, years down the road, but I kind of was like, this is cool, no one likes it, like, or everyone gives it a bad rap, like, I want to do it. I found the answer to all my problems. I feel amazing. I had weight issues that, you know, obviously for me, when I did meth, I didn't eat, and got really skinny, and I was like, yeah, this is great.
My first experience with drugs was ecstasy. My whole mind and my heart opened and I felt okay with myself. People are lying if they tell you that there's not experiences like that. I remember looking at the DJ standing behind this big box. He was this really good looking guy and he waved me over to come stand next to him. And it was like, this is my church. Like a minister stands in a pulpit, I was standing in the pulpit, this real, I mean, it gives me goosebumps talking about it. And the connection through the ecstasy that I felt with everyone, I loved everyone, and I could love myself, and the music were like, I used to sing hymns in church, it was like our hymns. It was the hymns of my group of friends. From that moment on, I was wanting to try everything.
I first delved into like hard drugs, amphetamine, especially in my early 20s. When I was of legal drinking age, I dove into heavy narcotics, which is ironic. And again, you know, sticking with the true alcoholic and addict mentality of it's never enough, and I don't know what the term moderation. I started doing ecstasy and speed, and it went again from 0 to 100, you know, just like that first episode of drinking. Earlier on than I would like to admit, I sort of always had that notion of, this is probably not gonna end well, but at that point it had definitely become, this feels good, this feels better. I get to escape my head, I get to escape past traumas, I get to just sort of, you know, you get to numb out. So I knew fairly early on that it was an issue, and you know, that sort of soft, quiet voice in the back of my head just became louder and louder.
I got arrested a lot. I think the worst was getting arrested on my robbery charge. I knocked over a drug dealer and her boyfriend, and they had drugs, and they, you know, called the cops, and I did a robbery. I committed a robbery.
I moved to California and I got sober in a 12-step program, and my life really took off. I had a career which took off tremendously, almost like literally the day I got sober. I got a great job opportunity and it just went up and up and up. 10 or so years into that career, actually more into that career, I then relapsed. All the success I had was meaningless because when you're on drugs, you don't feel it, you don't understand it. I see people now, you know, that love their careers and they have fun doing it, and it's what they were born to do. And I never had that feeling because, you know, either the drugs or youth or insecurity. Yeah, it's a shame.
I cleaned up before I joined the service. I cleaned up for a little bit. I remember I literally was 7 days clean because it started to pick up more and more speed, right, as I was getting closer to joining the military, and then I was able to stop. I never forgot it during my time, you know, when I was in the military. I was like, I need to do this, and I just didn't do it until I got out. When I got out, I just picked up right where I left off, and I just did not stop using. And it was like a daily thing. I'm not there anymore. Darren's completely gone.
I worked for a while, but not that long after, I lost the career because that's what happens. I mean, I lost everything I'd worked for. You know, not just the career, the house, all of it. I handled it the only way I knew how to handle it, which was I was either going to go live on the street like a homeless person, or I was going to get better.
I remember I was gone for about 4 days, and my mom tracked down my dealer's number and called him.
finally, it was, I think, about 7:30 at night, he finally answered.
She said, "You need to come home now."
I said, "Trevor, aren't you coming home tonight?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I am. I'll be home in about half an hour."
And so I got home, and again, like, I remember that show Intervention was out, and I was waiting for like the cameras and everything to be there because I was desperately wanting that. I was wanting somebody to save me because I didn't know how to bring it up or describe how I was feeling.
Anyways, he ended up coming home at 10:30, and we asked him if he had a drug problem.
But there were no cameras. There was no crew in my house. There was my mom and dad, and they were sitting in the living room, and my mom looked at me and she said, "Are you on drugs?" And my dad cut me off before I could even answer, and he said, "Don't give me that." He said, "I know you're on drugs." He said, "What are you doing and what are you going to do about it?" And that was the first kind of breakdown that I knew the fight was like over and it was close to the end.
I'd reach out to my family in the very early stages of my progression of addiction in my 20s. And I'd go into rehab, and then I'd get out and I'd relapse, and I wouldn't finish the program. I wouldn't really do anything. So it was just the endless cycles of treatment centers, and that probably was for, it was for a good few years.
It just went down the tubes bad eventually. And I ended up homeless. So I walked the street a lot at nights and slept outside here and there. Stood in a food line, like, in LA, waiting for the food donations. That's how low it got for me.
I was very much in love. He was sober, and he had a kid who lived with us the majority of the time, and I was loaded around his kid, and I was loaded around, this man and lying to him and stealing from him, and I was just this deplorable human being. If you use drugs and alcohol long enough, and you live that life of deception long enough, it's like you start to lose track of what's real and what's not. So he finally had to make the healthy choice for him and his child, and tell me that our relationship had to end, and I had to move out of that place, which had become my home. So I got sober to try and frantically scramble and save that life.
I decided I was going to take my life. So I thought, before I do this, I need to write a goodbye letter. And in the process of leaving the room where I had everything sat ready to go, I had my suit lined up so my mom would have something to bury me in. I had the needle. I just needed to write the note. Finally, the Los Angeles Police Department got a call. Thank God the police got me, because I never made it back to the room. I never wrote that letter. I ended up in jail for about 3 nights. I can't believe they didn't put me in a psych ward. Maybe they just knew I was tripping and needed to, dry out. As I walked out, one of the guards grabbed my arm as I was doing my discharge, my John Doe discharge, and he said, "I know that look in your eye." He said, "I've had it." He said, "Don't take your life is valuable." And he handed me the phone number for a treatment center.
I had called a treatment center to get into treatment, and their first opening was in January. So I thought, okay, I've got 3 months to use.
It was probably 2 weeks later, I went to work, and he hadn't come home all weekend, and I couldn't get a hold of him.
I started using a lot more. I was at a place that I worked at, and I stayed there all night, and I was using.
And I was so scared that he was dead.
And so that morning, I had no alcohol left, and I had no drugs left. And I knew the drugs weren't working anymore because I had used that whole night, and it just couldn't get to that spot where everything would turn off. I picked up the phone and I called my sister, who I'm really close with.
She called me within half an hour and said, "I found him, Mom." He called me.
And I said, "I need you to come get me." I said, "I need to go to the hospital. I need to go check in somewhere because I cannot stop doing this."
She said, "He's not doing good." And I said, "No, Leanne, I'm going to get him."
She said, "Well, let me call you right back." And 2 minutes later, my mom phoned. As I shared before, she ended up showing up. She was there in about 15 minutes.
I remember him getting in the car. He had his hood up. And he just looked at me and he said, Mama, I'm so fucked.
And the entire ride, to the hospital, I was going to check into a detox. I couldn't look at her in the face. All she could say to me was like, everything's gonna be okay. You're fine, you're gonna be okay, we're gonna get through this together. And, that's so difficult to, because I don't know what I'll put her through or what I put her through, but that was the unconditional love she gave me. And, as I said before, I believed her that it was gonna be okay. I don't know why, I don't know if something happened that morning where I just knew the gig was up.
There was relapses and treatment, relapse, treatment, hospital treatment. It was Christmas Eve, and I knew I was going into treatment that night. I did what I always did on opiates. I puttered around my apartment rearranging furniture. I used to do that all day long, all night long and all day long. And then I eventually, I don't know how, I got packed into the hospital.
I'm still here, and that getting swept up out of society and put into a cage, put into a cell was a good thing. I was honest with my therapist when I was in the program this last time, in the treatment program, and I said, I feel like I got interrupted in my using. I don't know if I'm gonna stop if I get off parole and probation. That time came and it went, and I didn't get high. I got the 6 months inpatient, 6 months outpatient, joint suspended sentence. It was like 4 or 5 years. So if I had basically had police contact when I was released, or I failed to do the program, I go to prison for 4 or 5 years.
My mom said, well, why don't we go to the treatment center that you're on the waiting list for? And I went over there with her, and I told the admissions people that I was done and I was gonna die, and that I needed to get in sooner. This was end of November, and they said, well, we still have a waiting list, but if you come tomorrow at 6 a.m. and somebody doesn't show up for their assessment, we can do your assessment. And somehow I showed up that next morning, and someone didn't show up, and they did my assessment, and I was in 2 weeks later. That was my experience. On December 13th, I checked into treatment and started.
This was my treatment center, with no delicious chef-made meals. And the bathrooms changed a little bit. I did some redecorating. But yeah, I laid on this floor, this cold tile floor, sobbing and shaking, and it was nice to be close to the toilet because coming off a ridiculous amount of pharmaceuticals, there was a lot of vomiting involved. This room was my friend and not. But yeah, this is really this room, and crying on my knees and praying to a God that at the time I didn't believe in my bedroom. That was me getting sober. So not the most glamorous experience. I think a treatment center probably would have been a better fit, but takes what it takes, I guess.
It was like the first day of a new school, going from middle school to high school. I had no idea of the routine. Funny thing is, nobody told me. I know we had chores and we had to be there. It was almost like going to camp, and I had no structure in my life. I was doing what I want, whenever I want, and how I wanted. I woke up to this music on an intercom, and it was the trumpet playing like they do in the army, and I remember thinking, what the fuck, like, where am I? You know, the moment I got there and I would go out and have a cigarette with someone, or there was a group of people in the lounge room and we would get to talking, it was like there was a part of me that felt so safe being in there. Start sharing in group, I was like that same effect that drugs and alcohol gave me, like, oh my God, I can breathe, you know, and just relax and be present. So that's what, you know, treatment was like for me.
I didn't do everything great because I ended up getting transferred to another one of their Tarzana's other program. You know, I was fraternizing with a woman. I always say that because that's what they called it. I was fraternizing with a woman at Tarzana Treatment Center. They found out about it and they were like, we're transferring you to Lancaster. And I was like, here I am, screwing things up, and I have the opportunity, you know, I didn't even have to get loaded and I could go back to prison.
I really think if I didn't go to that treatment center that day, I don't think I would have waited till January, because it was that window that I reacted on that morning, that something, you know, and I could look back and know there were plenty of those windows of opportunity, but I didn't react on them.
Don't get me wrong, I'm a drug addict, you know, I have a drug addiction. If I could shoot meth and heroin on a Friday, right after I got off work, shoot it through the weekend, and on a Sunday, if I could do that, I would do it. Because, you know, there's a reason I use drugs, because they were great. I can't do that. I do heroin, I do meth, I do anything. The wheels are gonna fall off. I'm gonna lose my job. Doesn't matter if I'm working in treatment or not. The job's gonna fall away. It's all gonna go. My family's gonna, you know, I'm gonna completely destroy myself.
I'd been in one place specifically, it shall remain nameless, but where they're mean. I mean, they punish you. They're like, you're an addict, you did something wrong. I mean, no concept of medical science and, you know, the disease of addiction. Clean is the opposite. Was the opposite for me. They got it immediately.
I'll drive, usually to the beach. It's kind of important, especially when I'm not going to work. I want to just kind of zone out as I'll drive to the beach, and I'll kind of just look out at the ocean, but it's always been something that's like my brain just kind of shuts off when I drive. The freedom that I've kind of gained now it's not necessarily you know, I've been freed physically, but also spiritually, emotionally, and I still go through times, trials, tribulations. It's not a one-time, you know, it's not a one-time thing. This is life. Things are always changing. Things are always going on. I'm always having a new experience. You know, I'm dealing with life issues, and I get the blessing, I get the gift, I get the opportunity to actually deal with life issues.
It was really hard to date or be in relationships. And I know that was a hesitation for him. You know, we joke about it today. I was like, what took you so long? And he always says, like, dude, you were in Dallas and you were in school. Like, what kind of hope was that?
Trevor had, I think it was 9 years then, and he was a very sober, living person. And that was important to me at that time in my life, to be with somebody that lived their life in a sober person's way. And I mean by that, by keeping your side of the street clean. You know, I think a lot of the reason that people are unhappy in their sobriety is because they don't live that way.
I'm pregnant, really pregnant, and uncomfortable, but it's pretty amazing. I have a lovely husband and a sweet little baby girl on the way, and a wonderful 11-year-old crazy, rambunctious stepson, and I live a kind of quiet life, you know, simple, and, you know, cook dinner at home, and it's really, I never would have imagined that those would have been the things that I enjoyed, and it's good. Life's good. It's simple.
I'm sure, you know, it's not uncommon for people to reunite with, you know, former relationships. And, you know, in recovery or not, you know, but I think the basis of our new longevity and ability to be there for each other is the fact that we're speaking a common language now.
I've been in really dysfunctional relationships, codependent relationships, and to meet somebody else in sobriety who was doing the work, who was taking responsibility for his actions, that was my first experience with somebody who was also in treatment, and it was a beautiful experience to be able to go through that with somebody.
My parents, I used to blame them, but it was really me. It was all me. It was not me allowing them to be part of my life, because I think we could have probably done it 20 years earlier. I do want to have a relationship with my family. I do want them to be part of my life. I do want them to know the man that I love and that I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. The last time that we were there, my dad's prayer was, "Dear Lord, please watch over my sons." And that was pretty amazing. It was a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah.
I probably was dropping a few tears at that point at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Monday,
Yeah.
leaving Long Island.
I wake up in the morning feeling good. That right there is amazing. I don't wake up in fear. I don't worry. I don't worry how I'm going to pay my bills, the rent, none of that. You know, my vision for the future now is being able to accomplish whatever I want to do. Another thing about the future is I don't tend to live in it anymore. I really am much more anchored to the short term now. I make goals and plans, sure, but I'm not constantly like fretting about the future. So I'm just trying to enjoy my life as it comes.
Every day that I'm sober today is another day where there's hope, which is a chance to win and not lose and to find life. Because all those years of using, they were stripping me slowly of life. So I can wake up today with hope. That's the word.
We got married 5 months ago. He's met my family. He was at my graduation. That was the first time all our families met, and yeah, I'm extremely grateful for him. He's also on this journey. So there's a lot of things that we have in common, and that he gets about me, and vice versa. And I think that's such a gift to have, because it's really a different language.
Every day, you know, I learn more and more about myself. I really was kind of walking around in a dream all those years I did drugs. I couldn't process, my insight button was switched off. I just couldn't process information about myself, good or bad. And, you know, I'm getting to do that.
You know, if I want to do something, I can go and do it. I have the freedom to go do it. When back in the day, even in early recovery, I didn't have that freedom. Loaded, I didn't have that freedom. I was like, oh, let's go do this, let's go do that. Nothing ever happened. But my life, a normal day for me is just to wake up, do what I gotta do that day, and lay down at night, and you know, and just be grateful that I'm still here. You know, I'm still sober, I'm still abstinent. I don't have to do that shit again.